the 24th of February, 2022, when Russia began its completely unwarranted invasion of Ukraine. And Ukraine put up the best defense they could, but Russia made pretty startling and deep incursions into Ukrainian territory in the first 24 hours. However, in the first 30 hours, there came reports of a brand new, hitherto unknown fighter ace called the Ghost of Kyiv. Some pilot in a 30-year-old plane, a MiG-29, Soviet-made, by the way, shot down 6 Russian fighter pilots in the first 30 hours of the Russian invasion. And this went viral, went all over the internet, and particularly in Eastern Europe, where it became a really important focus point for morale and anti-Russian sentiment. And this is particularly significant because the Ukrainian military, although determined and prepared for this invasion, sadly, because of the years and years of build-up towards it, is a quarter of the size of the Russian military in terms of number of soldiers. And according to Flight International, the Ukrainian Air Force had 210 military aircraft, including 98 combat aircraft, so that's fighter jets. Russia, by comparison, has 3,863 aircraft,
wow,
half of which are combat planes. So that's nearly 15 times as many combat planes as Ukraine has. Yeah.
It's amazing that even now, like, they haven't been able to get a commanding presence over the sky, is it? Like, they haven't been able to dominate Ukraine even in the air.
No, it's amazing. And a lot of that is, I think, to do with the determination of the Ukrainian military forces. And a lot of that arguably is down to the morale boost that the Ghost of Kyiv gave them in the first few days of the invasion. I mean, if somebody invades, like the Nazis invaded many parts of Europe in the 1930s, and they just walk in there and it feels overwhelming and everyone's like, oh, well, we can't beat them, let's just give up. If somebody invades and you've got a heroic example like the Ghost of Kyiv to inspire you to keep fighting back, to prove that the Russians may have the numbers, but they don't have the skill. I think that's really important to the fact that the Ukrainians have managed to keep on fighting.
And to put the fear and the self-doubt into the Russian invaders as well.
Absolutely.
That's Russian pilots.
Absolutely. Yeah. But fellas, you may remember, I don't know if you saw these, but there were pictures and video clips attributed to the Ghost of Kyiv, which went all around Facebook and Twitter.
And TikTok. It was a weird...
Yeah, big on
TikTok.
Yeah.
It was, you'd see like puppies, food, and then suddenly just war-torn Ukraine. Like, it was mad. It was a mad time on TikTok.
It is pretty crazy. They talk about the first televised war being Vietnam, and now what we see. This is, for me, this feels like the first properly, not televised, but the first war that's been so publicized. The availability of footage, like pretty disturbing stuff as well, on social media platforms is pretty insane.
I do agree though, Mark. It feels like it's like a social media thing. Like it's you never know like what thread is going to have something horrific in, which doesn't seem like it has been the case with anything else. I think maybe it's the proximity with this for us in the West with this one.
I think so.
The Ghost of Kyiv was eventually identified. On March the 14th, the Ghost of Kyiv was finally shot down by the Russians and was revealed to be a pilot, a very young pilot, actually. I think he was in his 20s.
No, I think he was 29, wasn't he?
Stepan Tarabalka, actual real pilot, and he became identified as the Ghost of Kyiv. And apparently from February the 24th to March the 14th, he shot down 40 Russian planes, which is incredible. And that would make him the first fighter ace of the 21st century. So here's the thing, because of the social media side of things, because of technology with mobile phones in particular, air combat in the Ukraine war has actually been really well documented, and it's been easier than ever to actually accurately record the number of planes shot down on both sides. And apparently, although by the time of his death, Stepan Tarabalka had shot down 40 Russian warplanes, that's more than the Russians had actually lost in the war at that point.
Officially,
and this is verifiable both by Western sources and by the Russians. So it's not just a case of the Russians pretending that, we haven't lost 40 planes. It's Western sources as well saying, well, we can verify that significantly fewer than 40 Russian planes have been shot down by this point in the war. So immediately you're like, okay, Stepan Tarabalka is real.
Was he any good?
Well, here's the sad thing, I guess. On the 30th of April, the Ukrainian Air Force Facebook and Twitter accounts posted, "The Ghost of Kyiv is a superhero legend whose character was created by Ukrainians. And the information about the death of the Ghost of Kyiv is incorrect. The Ghost of Kyiv is alive. It embodies the collective spirit of the highly qualified pilots of the Tactical Aviation Brigade who are successfully defending Kyiv and the region. Now, does that sound like a tacit admission that the Ghost of Kyiv didn't exist?
I mean, yeah, but I think that, but
Yes.
I think it's the best way of approaching that answer, right? Is to say that, look, he wasn't real, but he was inside of all of us all along. You know, we all embody the Ghost of Kyiv. You know, I think that's the kind of the best thing that they could have said. The question is whether the legend of the Ghost of Kyiv was an intentional bit of propaganda that was created by the Ukrainian government or by interested parties in that, or if it was just something that sprung up out of this kind of, a natural bit of propaganda that sprung up to bolster morale.
There's definitely a difference between something that's an outright lie or, explicitly propaganda. And like this guy might have been a really, really good pilot. Everyone in his squadron or whatever you call it is like, this guy's the best, and he shot down X number of planes. Then it gets exaggerated, then it gets printed to the news, and then it spirals from there. So it's like there's often an element of truth in all of this. It's like the Red Baron, for instance, supposedly shot down 80 planes in World War I. Huge number. Whether that actually occurred, he was obviously a brilliant pilot. Whether he shot down 80 is up for debate. But it's just that exaggeration of, there's a seed of truth and then it gets highly exaggerated. And whether it was this exact pilot or not, it kind of helps their cause that he's died as well. It's like, well, no one can verify or deny, right?
It's a weird one, isn't it? Because is it wrong to remember him for things he didn't do, or for him to not be remembered at all, except by those who knew him personally?
He was the one who spearheaded a feeling of the resistance movement. Defiance.
Yeah, that others were saying the ghost name was Vladimir Abdonov. What's the big problem with social media?
Fake news, yeah.
And it's interesting how in the Ukraine war we seem to have an example of fake news that may be a good thing.
Fake news / propaganda. And this definitely falls on the side of propaganda, it seems.
The former president of Ukraine from 2014 to 2019 posted a photo of a helmeted pilot in a cockpit on Twitter, identifying the individual as the Ghost of Kyiv, saying, with such strong defenders, Ukraine will definitely win this. And the picture was reverse image searched, and it was found that the pilot in the cockpit was a pilot called Vladimir Abdonov, and there were several pictures floating around of him. However, the pictures that were posted weren't genuine, and there were people that had looked into, Photoshop manipulation, and they could see that his face was actually photoshopped on, and a Ukrainian flag photoshopped in the background of a Canadian Air Force officer. But more interestingly, I think the man who had his face photoshopped on was actually a well-known person. I think he was an Argentinian lawyer from Buenos Aires who was fascinated to learn that he'd become the Ghost of Kyiv. And as some of the footage that had been posted showing the Ghost of Kyiv in action was actually from video games. It was video game footage. It wasn't even
that's crazy.
Someone
could even think that they could use that and get away with it. Imagine doing that in like the 90s. It's crazy.
Well, there was also other footage that was from military exercises or previous wars, wasn't there? That was attributed to, and I think it may be a case a bit like memes, right? And Alex, you pointed out already that this was a sensation on TikTok. There's the negative side of fake news, people pretending these clips are something else, and then there's that loving side of the internet where people are like, the meme type side, where we're going to take this concept and apply it to something different. And if you know the meme, you get the joke. But if you're an 85-year-old person logging onto the computer for the first time and you see this video, you're like, oh my goodness, that's real. And then it becomes fake news because somebody's been duped because they're not in on the joke. And I wonder to what extent the Ghost of Kyiv, given that it was a social media sensation that was boosting the morale of the Ukrainian people, to what extent people were using this video game footage to just join in on the propaganda rather than to actually create fake news, if that makes sense.
I know what you mean. Just to say, oh look, it's the Ghost of Kyiv, whilst posting in their minds really obvious gameplay footage, when actually that was duping some people who had never seen that kind of gameplay before and just imagining it as that's what it actually looks like type thing. I could see that, definitely.
Is it better or worse to have these things? Do they do more harm than good? What do you think?
It depends what side you're on, doesn't it?
Yeah. I mean, I feel like in terms of war and the horrific acts that happen during war, I'd rather there be no war and there be no need for this, you know? In terms of the horrific things that happen during war, this is probably pretty low. Worrying about like fake folk heroes is pretty low on the agenda.
Yeah, it's true. No, I think it's good for morale, isn't it? And it serves a purpose. It's not a terrible lie, is it? It's more on the lines of a white lie, isn't it? Exaggerating the truth as opposed to making up a lie, I imagine, in most cases. So I don't see it as that bad. But then, of course, I'm, speaking on the, as a supporter of Ukraine on the whole.
Yeah. I mean, I'm so grateful that the Ghost of Kyiv may have had a really important effect in galvanizing the Ukrainian people at the very beginning of the war to help them then form a counteroffensive, which has so far seems to be going quite well. Touch wood. Like Alex, I would rather war didn't exist, but if war has to exist, I think I would rather celebrate real heroes than fake heroes.
Yeah.
Even when they have a good effect, like the Ghost of Kyiv seems to have had for the Ukrainian people, I think it's sad that real heroes aren't necessarily going to get celebrated the way that they ought to be. Hopefully, as the Ukrainian government themselves have said, they themselves owned up to the Ghost of Kyiv being fake and said, now the record is set straight. We know the Ghost of Kyiv isn't real, was never real. And I think that might be a better way of conducting it. If you're going to invent some fake heroes, at least own up to it.
After the fact, yeah.
Yeah, and then after the war, you can celebrate the real heroes once all the cruelty is over. If anyone's interested, currently, as of today, I believe, the statistics are that the Ukrainian forces have lost around 40,000 wounded and killed up to this point, and the Russians have lost around 54,500, I think.
Where are you getting those figures? Because I've seen a variety of figures.
That's
posted.
the problem. This is my averaging of different sources,
right?
Because there's a fantastic website I foolishly clicked on, which what's it called? It's uawar.net, and it's about the war in Ukraine. And it has when you click on it, you get the statistics for Russian casualties, and then it has a tab, and you click on Ukrainian casualties, and the Russian casualties are actually very accurate. It's reporting them quite accurately. But then you click on the Ukrainian tab, and it just comes up with a big page that says "Heroes never die."
Right. Yeah. Okay.
And there's no statistics at all. And I mean, obviously, I'm on their side, but I'm also like, that's not how history is done. That's not the way things should be. Of course, Ukraine has launched a counteroffensive, which has taken the Russians seemingly by surprise, and they've regained at least 3,000 square miles of territory, I think they said.
It's difficult to gauge how big that is compared to what's been taken before, right?
I think someone in a news article compared it to the size of 2 greater Londons.
Yeah,
okay.
Which is massive when you think about it.
It is for London, the UK,
and it's. I think it's strategically significant as well because it brings them very close to controlling some very important supply routes, which may be key. If they can get them before the winter sets in, then that gives the Ukrainians a big advantage over the Russians when the Russians make their inevitable counterattack. However, Russia, I think, still has, what is it, a fifth or something of the country under their control? A significant proportion of Ukraine is under Russian control. They have the Crimea more or less locked down, and they're all kinds of stories of human rights abuses taking place there. So one can only hope that things go the right way, and maybe soon the Ukrainians won't need to make up any war heroes, and they'll have enough of their own to boost their morale.
Well, fingers crossed.
Fingers crossed.